Is this some kind of joke? The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, sliced through the desert air. Sergeant James Reeves, his Marine Corps uniform crisp in the morning sun, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the rifle resting on the shooting bench. The Fort Irwin long-distance firing range stretched before them like an ancient seabed baked hard under the relentless Mojave sun. Heat waves shimmered across its surface, distorting the distant targets into wavering specters. At 7 in the morning, the temperature already approached 95 degrees. The air smelled of gunpowder, hot metal, and ambition. "Sir, you can't be serious about bringing that thing here." Reeves continued, pointing again at the offending weapon. William Bill Harrison, a man whose 82 years were etched into the lines around his eyes and the patient set of his jaw, did not turn his head. His gaze remained fixed downrange where targets waited at distances most men could barely comprehend. He sat on a simple stool, his posture relaxed yet somehow rooted to the ground with the same permanence as the mountains behind him. The slight limp in his walk when he had arrived earlier suggested old injuries, but nothing in his bearing indicated frailty. The rifle in question was indeed a peculiar sight. Its custom-built chassis and stock were coated in a flat, non-reflective orange color, the same shade as a construction sign or a child's toy. It looked utterly out of place among the matte blacks, desert tans, and olive drabs of the military-grade hardware that populated the long-distance range. Max Sullivan, the range safety officer and a retired Marine gunnery sergeant of 65, watched the confrontation from his position near the tower. Something about the old man had caught his attention the moment he signed into the range log. It wasn't just the orange rifle or the outdated 7th Fleet cap Harrison wore. It was something in the way he moved, an economy of motion that spoke of decades of disciplined movement. His faded jeans and simple button-up shirt were unremarkable, but the Seiko mechanical watch from the 1970s and what appeared to be a West Point-class ring told a different story. Another young Marine, Private First Class Mark Sanders, with a spray of freckles across his nose, snickered loudly. Maybe he thinks it's a water gun sergeant for when he gets thirsty. The small group of Marines, all crisp uniforms and high and tight haircuts, shared a laugh. They were the new breed masters of digital scopes and ballistic calculators. And to them, this old man and his garish rifle were relics from a forgotten age, an amusing distraction before their real training began. Reeves took a step closer, his shadow falling over Harrison's bench. "I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your equipment, sir. This is a live-fire range for active duty personnel. We're conducting advanced sniper training." He pointed again at the orange rifle. "That is a distraction and a safety hazard." His tone was a carefully rehearsed blend of authority and condescension, the kind a young man uses when he feels he has all the power in a situation. Harrison remained silent, his hands resting calmly on his knees. His stillness seemed to unnerve Reeves more than any argument could have. It was an unnatural quiet, a reservoir of patience so deep it felt like a silent rebuke. The range, a sprawling expanse of graded dirt and rock, was a place of thunderous noise and precise violence. But in this small bubble of confrontation, an uncomfortable quiet had fallen. Other shooters at nearby benches had paused their conversations, tapering off as they watched the one-sided exchange. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with ballistics. Reeves, feeling the eyes on him and misinterpreting the old man's silence as defiance, pressed on. His voice rose a clear breach of range etiquette. "Did you hear me, old man? I said pack it up. What are you even doing here? This isn't the local VFW bingo night." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You probably don't even have the proper clearance to be on this facility." Harrison finally moved. The motion was slow, deliberate, as he reached for his simple canvas range bag. The Marines tensed, expecting him to finally comply. Instead, he drew out a worn leather wallet, the kind that folds over on itself and is softened by decades of use. He opened it and produced a laminated card, his base access permit, and silently held it out. Reeves snatched the card. He glanced at it, then did a double take. "This has to be expired or fake." He turned it over in his hands as if expecting the plastic to dissolve and reveal the deception. The name read Harrison William R., and the credentials, to his visible frustration, were all in order. He shoved the card back at the old man. His inability to find a legitimate reason to eject Harrison only fueled his irritation. "Fine, you have access. Reeves conceded, his voice tight. But that doesn't mean you can play with your cheese here, and we have a 4,000-meter target set up for our final qualification. It's a multi-million-dollar sensor suite, not a backstop for your personal science project. He gestured downrange toward a target so distant it was an almost invisible speck to the naked eye. We're pushing the limits of modern technology here. The last thing we need is a stray round from whatever that is messing up our data. Sanders, emboldened by his sergeant's aggression, reached out and poked the orange rifle stock with his finger. Feels like cheap plastic. You probably 3D printed it in your garage. The moment the young Marine's finger touched the rifle, Harrison's eyes changed. For a fraction of a second, the calm, patient gaze of the old man was gone, replaced by something ancient and hard like flint. The desert sun glinting off the rifle's scope vanished, and in its place was the dim, desperate light of a field tent smelling of cordite and blood. He felt the phantom weight of a wounded comrade leaning against him, heard the distant, rhythmic thump of mortar fire walking its way closer. Honduras, 1989. Operation Golden Pheasant. The jungle heat pressed down like a physical weight, steam rising from the leaf litter after the afternoon rain. Captain William Harrison moved through the undergrowth with the silence of a ghost, each step placed with certainty, despite the treacherous terrain. The distress beacon had led him to the downed F-16, its metal carcass still smoking in the small clearing. The ejection seat was empty, a good sign. He found Captain Michael Westwood half a mile away, dragging himself toward the extraction point with a determination that impressed even Harrison. The pilot's flight suit was soaked with blood from a compound fracture in his right leg, and his face was ashen from shock and blood loss. Special Forces, Westwood had asked through gritted teeth when Harrison materialized from the jungle. Harrison nodded quickly, assessing the injuries. Captain Harrison, let's get that leg stabilized. They shot me down with it, so I didn't even see coming, Westwood explained, his breath coming in short gasps. Recon flight along the Nicaraguan border. Wasn't supposed to be any anti-aircraft this far north. Harrison worked quickly, cutting away the flight suit and cleaning the wound. The bone had pierced the skin, but miraculously no major arteries were hit. Sandinista Special Forces have been pushing into Honduras. Command thinks they're being advised by some Russian Spetsnaz. Communications, Westwood asked, wincing as Harrison set the bone. Harrison shook his head. Radio's busted in the crash. Extraction team knows your approximate location, but it'll be at least 3 days before they can reach us. And we're not alone out here. He helped Westwood drink from his canteen, then gave him a shot of morphine from the med kit. As the pain eased from the pilot's face, Harrison saw the gravity of their situation settling in his eyes. I can't walk on this, Westwood said. You should leave me. Give me a pistol and... I've never left an American soldier behind. Harrison cut him off. And I'm not starting with you. The memory receded, leaving the bright desert sun and the smirking faces of the young Marines in its place. Harrison hadn't moved, hadn't spoken a word, but a subtle shift had occurred. The quiet dignity now had an edge, a hint of the immense gravity it held in check. Across the range, standing near the tower, Max Sullivan watched the scene unfold with growing concern. He'd seen his share of arrogant young NCOs, but something about this confrontation was different. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was the target of it. The old man wasn't a typical hobbyist. There was an economy of motion in the way he sat, a profound stillness that spoke of immense discipline. And the rifle, as strange as it looked, had the clean, purposeful lines of a custom tool, not a toy. Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he watched Harrison's momentary change in expression when Sanders touched the rifle. He'd seen that look before. The 1,000-yard stare of a man revisiting battlefields long past. It was a look no civilian hobbyist would have. Sullivan's mind raced back to a classified briefing he'd attended at Quantico in 1990, shortly before he retired. A presentation about a legendary operative they called the Ghost of the Desert, a man who had set the world record for confirmed long-distance kills with a rifle he had built himself. A rifle that was famously painted orange. Sullivan looked at the sign-in sheet again, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. Harrison William R. The name connected with the half-remembered legend in his mind, and a cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. These kids had no idea what they were doing. They weren't just disrespecting an old veteran. They were poking a sleeping giant. Sullivan turned, pulling his phone from his pocket. He walked behind the range tower, his back to the unfolding drama, and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number for the base's command duty officer. He was a gunny, retired or not, and he still had connections. He knew this was a massive overstep of his authority as a ranged civilian, a call he could get fired for making. But he also knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that it was a call he had to make. "Lieutenant Parker, this is Gunny Sullivan out at the long-range facility," he said when the line connected, his voice low and urgent. "I have a situation here that you need to be aware of. We have some young Marines from the 1st Recon Battalion giving a hard time to an old-timer." "A discipline issue, Gunny." The voice on the other end was professional, but disinterested. "Shouldn't that go through their company command?" "Normally, yes, Lieutenant," Sullivan said, his patience wearing thin. "But the civilian on our range is named William Harrison." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Just static. Sullivan could almost hear the gears turning in the young officer's head. "Harrison," Lieutenant Parker finally asked, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "Am I supposed to know that name?" "Just run it up the chain, Lieutenant," Sullivan insisted, his voice hardening. "Run it up the chain fast and tell them it's about his rifle. The orange one." He hung up before the officer could ask any more questions. He had lit the fuse. Now he could only wait and hope the bomb didn't go off in everyone's face. Inside the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the base command center, Lieutenant Parker stared at his phone. Gunny Sullivan was not a man given to drama or overreaction. With a sigh, he typed the name William R. Harrison into the global military personnel database. The system spun for a moment, then a flag popped up. A bright red flag. "Access restricted, eyes only, 07 and above." Parker felt a jolt as if he'd touched a live wire. 07. That was a brigadier general. He was a second lieutenant. He stood up from his desk and walked briskly to the office of the base commander, Colonel Richard Bennett. He knocked and entered without waiting. "Sir, you need to see this." Colonel Bennett, a man with a face like a road map of every desert conflict for the past 30 years, looked up from his paperwork, annoyed. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "I got a call from Gunny Sullivan at the long range. There's a civilian out there, William Harrison." The system flagged him heavily. Parker turned his tablet around to show the colonel the screen. Bennett's demeanor changed instantly. He came around his desk and looked at the lieutenant's screen. When he saw the name and the security classification, all the color drained from his face. He didn't say a word. He just picked up the secure line on his desk, the one that connected directly to the office of the commanding general of the entire base. "General Morgan, it's Colonel Bennett. I apologize for the interruption." His voice was tense, controlled. "Ma'am, he's here. Harrison, he's on our range right now." There was a pause as Bennett listened. "Yes, ma'am, the ghost of the desert. He's in a confrontation with some of our recon Marines." The colonel listened for another moment, his face grim. "Yes, ma'am, I'll meet you at your vehicle. We're rolling now." He slammed the phone down and looked at Parker, his eyes blazing with an intensity the lieutenant had never seen before. "Get me the commander of 1st Recon on the line. Tell him his career is on the line. Tell him Brigadier General Morgan is en route to his location personally, and God help his Marines." Back at the range, Sergeant Reeves's patience had finally evaporated. The old man's silent refusal to yield had become a personal insult. The small crowd was growing, and he felt his authority, his very identity, as a Marine NCO being challenged by an octogenarian with a ridiculous orange gun. He had to end this. "All right, that's it. I'm done asking." He snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. "You are being a danger to this facility and my Marines. I am ordering you to vacate this firing point immediately. If you don't, I will have you detained for trespassing and obstructing a training exercise." His face flushed red as he continued. "We'll get you a nice long mental evaluation. Maybe you're confused, old man. Maybe you forgot where you are." He took a menacing step forward, reaching for Harrison's shoulder, intending to physically escort him away from the bench. He never made it. The sound started as a low rumble, a vibration felt through the soles of their boots. It grew quickly into the percussive roar of multiple high-performance engines pushed to their limit. Every head on the range turned toward the main access road. A cloud of dust was billowing into the sky, chasing a convoy of 2 Humvees and 3 black government-plated SUVs that were closing the distance at a terrifying speed. They weren't just driving, they were charging as if the vehicles themselves sensed the urgency of their mission. The convoy bypassed the main parking area, driving directly onto the graded dirt of the range itself and skidding to a halt just yards behind the confrontation. The dust had barely begun to settle when doors flew open and figures emerged with a disciplined urgency that made the young recon Marines look like amateurs playing at war. Out of the lead vehicle stepped Colonel Bennett, his face a mask of controlled fury. But it was the figure who emerged from the passenger side of the second vehicle that caused every jaw on the range to drop. Brigadier General Eleanor Morgan, a woman known for her iron will and a combat record that was the stuff of legends, stepped onto the dirt. She wore her immaculate uniform, her single star gleaming in the desert sun, her eyes sharp and intelligent as they swept the scene, taking in the arrogant posture of Sergeant Reeves, the stunned faces of his men, and finally settling on the calm, seated figure of William Harrison. She ignored everyone else. Her stride was powerful and direct as she walked straight toward the old man. The entire range had fallen utterly silent. The only sound was the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the pinging of the cooling engines. Sergeant Reeves stood, frozen, his hand still hovering in the air where he had intended to grab Harrison. He looked from the general to the old man and back again, his mind unable to process what was happening. General Morgan stopped directly in front of William Harrison. She didn't speak. Instead, she brought her heels together with a sharp crack. Her arms snapped up in the crispest, most respectful salute Reeves had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer in passing. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living legend. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. They are ignorant of who they are addressing." She held the salute, waiting. Harrison slowly, gracefully rose from his stool. He was not as tall as he once was, but he stood with a straightness that defied his years. He gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Only then did the general drop her salute. She turned to face Sergeant Reeves, and the warmth in her eyes was replaced by glacial ice. "Sergeant," she began, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who this man is?" Reeves, pale and trembling, could only stammer, "No, ma'am. He's a civilian, ma'am. A civilian." The general let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sergeant, you and your men are standing on ground. You've never earned breathing air you haven't paid for in the presence of a man who built the very world you have the privilege of serving. This is not just a civilian." She said the name as if it were a benediction. "This is William Harrison." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "For those of you who are too young or too ignorant to know, let me educate you. This man holds the highest civilian award for valor our country can bestow. He was a special projects consultant for DARPA for 30 years. Before that, he served in places your history books don't have names for." The Marines stood transfixed, their earlier bravado evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. "He is credited with 5 confirmed kills at over 2,500 humans," Morgan continued, "a record that stood for nearly 4 decades. All achieved with a rifle he designed and built himself. He is the reason our sniper doctrine is what it is today." Her voice dropped lower, forcing everyone to lean in slightly to hear. "We call him the ghost of the desert. Not because he's dead, but because he would go into places no one else could accomplish, missions no one else would dare and leave without a trace." She took a step toward the shooting bench and gestured to the orange rifle. "And this toy you were so quick to mock, this is the Mark V, the prototype for the M210 sniper system you have slung on your back, Sergeant. Except this one is better. He built it in a forward operating base with salvaged parts and a block of aluminum." Morgan's eyes swept over the now thoroughly humiliated Marines. "The bright orange paint you find so amusing, that was so medevac could spot his position for extraction after he spent 3 days holding off an entire enemy Special Forces platoon, alone protecting a downed pilot." She let that sink in before delivering the coup de grace. "That color saved his life and the life of that pilot, who I might add went on to become a 4-star general." The silence on the range was now absolute, thick with shame and awe. Sergeant Reeves looked as if he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. His friends, the Marines, who had been laughing and joking just minutes before, stared at their boots, their faces burning with humiliation. General Morgan turned back to Reeves, her voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You did not see a veteran. You saw an old man. You did not see a piece of history. You saw a T. You saw a weakness where you should have seen unimaginable strength. You have honored your uniform, your corps, and yourselves. She pointed a single trembling finger at him. You and your entire squad will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow for a personal lesson in Marine Corps history and professional courtesy. It's a lesson you will not soon forget. As the general's words hung in the air, William Harrison finally spoke. His voice was not loud, but it had a quiet authority that commanded even more attention than the general's anger. General, he said calmly, they're young, they're proud, it's a good thing. They just need to learn where to point it. He turned his gaze to Sergeant Reeves. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, weary wisdom. Your job isn't to be the strongest son. It's to respect the strength that came before you. Humility is a heavier burden than any rucksack, and it's the one that will carry you the furthest. He then patted the stock of the orange rifle. As he did, another flash of memory, sharper this time. He was in a makeshift workshop, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and wet earth. He was younger, his hands steady and sure, as he milled the receiver. The pilot, whose leg he had just set and splinted, was lying on a cot nearby, feverish. "Why orange, Bill?" Westwood had mumbled through the haze of pain and medicine. Harrison didn't look up from his work. "Because I only plan on making one shot," he had replied. "After that, I want to be easy to find, one way or another." The memory was a testament to a kind of focused courage that was beyond the comprehension of the young men standing before him. He was a man who had built a beacon for his own rescue or his own demise, all hinging on the success of a single impossible shot. Harrison looked up from the rifle to find Reeves still staring at him. The young sergeant's face a complex mixture of shame, confusion, and dawning respect. Behind the sergeant, Sullivan stood with a knowing look, a slight nod acknowledging what they both understood. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way, but they were the ones that lasted a lifetime. General Morgan placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder, a gesture of both respect and old friendship. "Bill, we have a lot to catch up on. But first, I think these young men need to understand exactly what that rifle can do." Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes measuring the distance to the 4,000-meter target that had been the source of so much contention. "Been a while since I stretched her legs," he said quietly, the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Might as well see if the old girl still has it in her." The Marines, their earlier contempt now replaced by an almost childlike curiosity, watched as Harrison settled back onto his stool, checked the wind with a small piece of thread from his pocket, and began to prepare for a shot that would redefine what they believed was possible. The crowd at Fort Irwin's long-range facility stood in a semicircle, their earlier conversations silenced by the presence of Brigadier General Eleanor Morgan. The morning sun cast long shadows across the packed earth as the general maintained her position beside William Harrison, her posture radiating both respect and protection. The orange rifle gleamed under the desert light, no longer an object of ridicule, but a piece of living history. Sergeant James Reeves remained rooted to the spot, his face drained of color. The cocksure demeanor that had defined him moments ago now replaced by stunned silence. Around him, his squad of Marines shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between their boots, their sergeant and the legendary figure they had so casually dismissed. General Morgan's words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Her pronouncement about Harrison's identity had transformed the atmosphere at the range more effectively than any command ever could. Now she turned to face Harrison fully, her expression softening with something that looked remarkably like reverence. "Captain Harrison," she said, using his former rank out of habit, "it's been too long." Harrison's weathered face broke into a slight smile. "Just Bill now, General. Been a civilian longer than I ever was a soldier." Morgan shook her head. "Some men never stop being what they truly are, no matter what title they carry." She gestured toward the orange rifle. "And clearly some skills never fade." Reeves watched this exchange with growing confusion. The general was speaking to this old man as if he were royalty, as if he were someone whose name should be known to every Marine. Yet Reeves had never heard of William Harrison, or the Ghost of the Desert, in any of his training or military history courses. How could someone so apparently significant be so completely absent from the record? As if reading his thoughts, General Morgan addressed the gathered Marines once more. "You won't find Harrison in your textbooks or training manuals. Not by name. His operations were classified beyond top secret for decades. Some still are. She looked at Harrison with an expression that asked for permission. When he gave a slight nod, she continued. But what you have learned, what every sniper in our armed forces has learned, are the techniques and principles he developed. The ballistic calculations you use, Harrison created them. The forward hide construction methods you were taught last month, his innovation. The patience and discipline that separates a true sniper from a man with a rifle, those were his lessons too. A new voice cut through the silence. And that orange monstrosity really is the grandfather of the M210 system. It was Master Sergeant Davis, the sniper instructor, who had been working with Reeves's squad. His tone wasn't disrespectful, but genuinely curious. Harrison nodded. The basic action and barrel harmonics are the same. Your M210 has better materials, of course, better optics, but the soul of it, he patted the orange stock. It's all right here. Davis approached cautiously, eyeing the rifle with new interest. May I? He asked, his hands hovering respectfully. Harrison considered this for a moment, then gave a single nod. Davis carefully lifted the rifle, his trained hands immediately recognizing the perfect balance and intuitive ergonomics that had later become hallmarks of the military-issue M210. His expression transformed from curiosity to astonishment. This receiver, it looks like it was milled from a single block, Davis said, his voice hushed. Engine mount from an F-16, Harrison confirmed. The only piece of aircraft-grade aluminum I could find in that jungle. Reeves listened to this exchange, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. He had mocked a living legend to his face. Worse, he had been on the verge of physically removing Harrison from the range when General Morgan arrived. The thought made his stomach turn. In the command center, Lieutenant Parker watched with growing amazement as the security clearance process for Harrison's file unfolded on his screen. The system required not one but 3 separate authorizations, each from officers of general rank or higher. As the file finally unlocked, the screen filled with commendations, mission reports, and photographs spanning 4 decades of service. What caught Parker's eye wasn't the impressive list of medals or the mission success rate. It was a photograph from 1989 showing a much younger Harrison receiving the Distinguished Intelligence Cross from the CIA director. The citation was heavily redacted, but phrases like unprecedented bravery and saved 18 American lives were clearly visible. As Parker scrolled through the file, a pattern emerged. Harrison appeared in the background of history's pivotal moments, always unacknowledged, always essential. The file confirmed what General Morgan had said at the range. William Harrison was a ghost, a man who had shaped modern warfare without ever appearing in its official narrative. Parker printed several pages from the file and hurried from the command center, knowing the general would want this information. Back at the range, a kind of impromptu history lesson was underway. The Marines, including Reeves, had gathered around Harrison, their earlier disrespect replaced by rapt attention. Max Sullivan stood nearby, a knowing smile on his face. This was the kind of lesson these young men would never forget. In '89, we were running operations along the Nicaraguan border. Harrison explained, his voice steady but quiet enough that everyone had to lean in slightly to hear. The Sandinistas had Soviet support Special Forces advisors training their troops in anti-aircraft tactics. You were in Honduras during Golden Pheasant, Davis asked, naming the operation. Harrison nodded. Unofficially, my mission was parallel to the main operation. Intelligence gathering along the border. When Captain Westwood's F-16 went down, I was the closest American asset. As Harrison spoke, his mind drifted back to those 3 days in the Honduran jungle. The memory was so vivid he could smell the rich, rotting vegetation and feel the oppressive humidity on his skin. Day 1 had been about survival and stabilizing Westwood. The pilot's leg was badly broken, and infection was the most immediate threat. Harrison had used the limited supplies in his kit to clean and set the break, then constructed a small, well-concealed shelter where they could hide from the Sandinista patrols that were surely searching for the downed American pilot. The first night was the worst. Harrison continued, unaware that he had transitioned from internal memory to spoken narrative. Westwood was running a fever from infection. I'd given him the last of my antibiotics, but it wasn't enough, and I could hear the patrols getting closer. The Marines listened in silence, the modern world falling away as Harrison's words painted a vivid picture of desperate survival against overwhelming odds. I knew they'd have dogs, So I set up a perimeter of false trails using Westwood's blood-soaked bandages to lead them away from our position. Then I waited. Harrison described how he had hidden in the jungle canopy watching as an 8-man patrol approached their location. When the point man separated slightly from the group, Harrison descended without a sound, neutralized him with his knife, and disappeared with the man's radio and ammunition before the rest of the patrol realized what had happened. By morning, they knew someone was out there with their downed pilot. They just didn't know who or how many. That confusion bought us time. Day 2 brought new challenges. Westwood's condition had deteriorated, and Harrison knew extraction was still at least 36 hours away. The Sandinista forces had expanded their search perimeter, now operating in groups too large for Harrison to engage directly, and their sophisticated radio communications suggested the presence of Soviet advisors coordinating the search. I needed a force multiplier, Harrison said, something that would let me engage at a distance where their numbers wouldn't matter. That's when he found the abandoned Honduran military outpost, little more than a shack with some basic tools and equipment left behind during a hasty retreat. Among the discarded items was a broken M14 rifle, its stock shattered and barrel pitted with rust. It wasn't much, but it had the core components I needed, Harrison explained. A trigger group, a bolt assembly, the rest I could fabricate. The gathered Marines exchanged glances of disbelief. Building a functioning precision rifle from scraps in a jungle workshop under threat of enemy discovery seemed impossible. Yet the orange rifle that now rested again in Harrison's hands was living proof. General Morgan, who had been listening silently, added context to Harrison's understated account. What Captain Harrison isn't telling you is that he was also monitoring Soviet radio traffic, treating Westwood's worsening infection with jungle medicinals when his supplies ran out, and occasionally eliminating Sandinista scouts who strayed too close to their position, all while building that rifle by hand. Harrison shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. You do what needs doing. Sullivan, who had been quiet until now, asked the question that everyone was thinking. The orange paint, sir, where did that come from? A ghost of a smile crossed Harrison's face. Runway marker paint, found it in the outpost. Figured if I was going to take this one shot, I'd better make sure our extraction team could find us afterward. The smile faded, if there was an afterward. By the third day, the situation had become critical. Westwood's fever had broken, but he was still weak from blood loss and infection. The Sandinista search had intensified with helicopter overflights joining the ground patrols. An intelligence chatter indicated the arrival of a high-value Soviet advisor, a KGB operative known as the Butcher of Managua, who specialized in extracting information from captured pilots. Harrison knew that once this man arrived, their chances of survival would drop dramatically. He also knew that eliminating the KGB operative would throw the entire Sandinista operation into disarray, potentially buying enough time for the extraction team to reach them. There was only one problem: the KGB man would be arriving at a forward base camp nearly 2,700 yards from Harrison's position. 2,700 yards. Davis breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. Through jungle canopy in that humidity with a homemade rifle. Harrison nodded. The humidity was actually the biggest challenge. Change the air density affected the bullet drop calculations. Had to compensate on the fly. But how did you even see the target at that distance in jungle conditions? Reeves asked, speaking up for the first time since the general's arrival. I didn't, Harrison replied simply. Not directly. I had observed the camp layout the previous day, knew where the command tent was positioned, knew the KGB operative would be there for the initial briefing. The implications of what Harrison was describing slowly dawned on the Marines. He hadn't just made an impossible shot. He had made an impossible blind shot, firing through vegetation at a target he couldn't even see, based solely on his knowledge of the terrain and human behavior patterns. I calculated bullet drop for the distance and humidity, Harrison continued, factored in the resistance from the foliage the round would pass through, estimated wind variations at different elevations. Then I took the shot. And you hit the target, General Morgan stated, not a question, but a confirmation. Harrison nodded once. Center mass. The confusion that followed gave us just enough time. The extraction team found us because of the orange rifle. I had positioned it above the canopy as a marker. What Harrison didn't add was that by the time the helicopters arrived, he had lost so much blood from his own untreated wounds that he was barely conscious. He had used the last of his medical supplies on Westwood, choosing the pilot's survival over his own comfort. The story hung in the air, its weight palpable. These weren't the sanitized war stories the young Marines were used to hearing, with clear objectives and triumphant outcomes. This was survival in its rawest form, the kind of desperate ingenuity that came from having no options but failure. The pilot, Reeves said suddenly, the one you saved. What happened to him? Before Harrison could answer, the sound of an approaching helicopter cut through the desert air. All heads turned toward the noise as a sleek Black Hawk appeared on the horizon, rapidly closing the distance to the range. I believe you're about to find out, General Morgan said, a rare smile breaking across her face. The helicopter circled once before setting down at the far end of the range, its rotors kicking up a swirl of dust. As the turbines wound down, the side door slid open and a figure emerged. Even at a distance, the 4 stars on his uniform were unmistakable. A full general walking with a slight limp toward the gathered group. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morgan announced, allow me to introduce General Michael Westwood, Commander of Strategic Air Command. The effect of this revelation rippled through the assembled Marines. They snapped to attention as one, their training overriding their shock. Here was living proof of Harrison's story walking toward them, the downed pilot, now one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire military. Westwood approached the group, his gait slightly uneven from the old injury, but his posture unbending. At 78, his face was lined with age and responsibility, but his eyes were sharp and clear as they found Harrison in the crowd. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other, decades of shared history passing between them in a glance. Then Westwood broke into a wide grin. 36 years, Bill, he said, his voice carrying across the now silent range. 36 years and I still owe you a drink. Harrison stood, a rare smile transforming his weathered face. You're late, Mike, as usual. The two men embraced a genuine display of emotion that transcended military formality. When they separated, Westwood kept one hand on Harrison's shoulder, turning to address the Marines. I see you've all met the man who saved my life, he said, but I'm guessing he left out some details. Westwood looked at the gathered faces, seeing the mixture of awe and confusion. He didn't tell you that he killed 7 Sandinista Special Forces operators in 3 days, most with just a knife, did he? Or that he gave me the last of his water and antibiotics, nearly dying of dehydration and infection himself? Harrison looked uncomfortable with the praise, but Westwood continued. And I'm certain he didn't mention that the orange paint job on that rifle saved both our lives. When the extraction team finally located us, they spotted that bright orange marker through the canopy. Without it, we would have been just 2 more bodies lost in the jungle. The general's gaze settled on Sergeant Reeves. Young man, when I saw that rifle for the first time, I was delirious with fever, convinced I was going to die in that jungle. But Harrison promised me he'd get us home. He made one shot, one impossible shot, and kept that promise. Westwood's voice took on a harder edge. So when I hear that a Marine sergeant was disrespecting that rifle and the man who built it, I have to wonder what kind of training you have received. Reeves stood rigid, his face flushed with shame. No excuse, sir, he managed to say, his voice barely audible. General Morgan stepped forward. Rest assured, General Westwood, this incident will be addressed thoroughly. Sergeant Reeves and his squad will be receiving specialized education on the history they seem to have missed. Westwood nodded, satisfied. He turned back to Harrison, his expression softening. I didn't just come for the reunion, Bill. I came to ask a favor. Harrison raised an eyebrow questioningly. These young Marines have a 4,000-meter target set up, Westwood explained, gesturing downrange. I'd like them to see what that orange monstrosity can really do. A murmur ran through the crowd. 4,000 meters was beyond the effective range of even the most advanced modern sniper systems. It was a distance so vast that the curvature of the earth became a significant factor in the ballistic calculations. Harrison looked downrange, his eyes measuring the distance. Been a while since I stretched her legs this far, he said quietly. Can it be done? Master Sergeant Davis asked, professional curiosity overriding protocol. 4,000 meters with that rifle. Harrison considered the question seriously. The rifle can do it, he finally said. Question is whether these old eyes and hands can still manage the shot. Westwood smiled. Only one way to find out. As Harrison moved back to the shooting bench, the Marines cleared a space around him, now treating the area with the reverence of a shrine. Sullivan quickly brought out a spotting scope and set it up on a tripod beside Harrison's position. Harrison settled himself on the stool, placing the orange rifle on the bench before him. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as he began to prepare for the shot. He extracted a small notebook from his pocket, its pages yellowed with age, and jotted down a series of calculations based on the current conditions. The Marines watched in fascination as Harrison then produced a small spool of thread from his range bag. He pulled out a single strand and held it up, watching its movement in the slight breeze. This old-school wind check, so different from the digital wind meters the Marines used, seemed to provide Harrison with crucial information. He made a small adjustment to his calculations. Next came the rifle itself. Harrison's hands moved over it with the familiarity of a concert pianist touching a beloved instrument. He checked the action, verified the barrel was clean, and examined the scope mounts for any signs of movement. Satisfied, he loaded a single round into the chamber. The bullet was unlike anything the Marines had seen before. Custom-made, it gleamed dully in the sunlight before disappearing into the rifle's breech. Hand-loaded, Harrison explained, noting their interest. Modified boat-tail hollow point with a tungsten core, designed specifically for extreme long distance. As Harrison settled into the shooting position, Westwood knelt beside him, assuming the role of spotter, just as he had in the jungle all those years ago. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of survival, now renewed on a sun-baked firing range in the Mojave. Wind is from the southwest, 2 miles per hour variable, Westwood said, falling easily into the familiar pattern. Target is a standard silhouette at 4,000 meters. Mirage is minimal. Harrison nodded, making minute adjustments to his scope. The Marines watched in silence, understanding they were witnessing something rare and precious, a master practicing his craft at the highest level. "On your shot, Ghost," Westwood said quietly, using Harrison's old call sign. Harrison took a slow, deep breath. As he exhaled, he seemed to become utterly still, as if he had transformed into part of the earth itself. The only movement was his finger, gently taking up the slack in the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and authoritative in the desert air. The orangey stock barely moved against Harrison's shoulder, the recoil management system he had designed decades ago still functioning perfectly. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The bullet was in flight, traveling over 2 miles across the open desert. The laws of physics, gravity, and aerodynamics all working upon that small piece of metal as it arced through the sky. Then a small screen next to General Morgan flashed green. A perfect hit, dead center on the target. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't just that Harrison had made a shot few professional snipers would even attempt. It was that he had done it with a rifle he had built by hand in a jungle 36 years ago, with aging eyes and without the benefit of modern ballistic computers. Westwood was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like Honduras, Bill. Just like Honduras." The spell broken, the range erupted in spontaneous applause. Even General Morgan was clapping, her usually stern face transformed by a genuine smile. The Marines, Reeves included, were staring at Harrison with expressions that bordered on worship. Harrison, for his part, simply nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. He carefully unloaded the rifle and placed it back on the bench, with the same respect one might show a sacred relic. General Morgan stepped forward, raising her hand for silence. When the range had quieted, she addressed the group. "What you have witnessed today is more than marksmanship. It is living history. The techniques and principles that make our modern sniper program the best in the world were developed by Captain Harrison throughout his career." She turned to Harrison. "Bill, I know you value your privacy and the full extent of your contributions will remain classified. But I believe these young Marines deserve to understand the legacy they're inheriting." Harrison considered this for a moment, then nodded his agreement. "Therefore," Morgan continued, "effective immediately, this range will be renamed the Harrison Long Distance Facility, and a training program will be established under Master Sergeant Davis's supervision to preserve the specialized knowledge Captain Harrison has developed." Davis straightened, clearly honored by the assignment. "We would be privileged to have your input on the curriculum, sir," he said to Harrison. Harrison looked thoughtful. "Modern technology has its place," he said, "but the fundamentals never change. Patience, discipline, understanding the environment, respecting the weapon." His eyes found Reeves, "and respecting those who came before." Reeves swallowed hard, then stepped forward. "Sir," he said, addressing Harrison directly, "I want to apologize properly. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant and deeply wrong. Harrison studied the young sergeant, seeing beyond the momentary shame to the core of the man. I meant what I said earlier, Sergeant. Humility is the heaviest burden a warrior carries, but it's also the most valuable. He gestured toward the orange rifle. This isn't just a weapon, it's a responsibility. Every time you look through a scope, you're making a decision that can't be taken back. The day you stop feeling the weight of that responsibility is the day you should put the rifle down for good. Reeves nodded, absorbing the lesson. Around him, his squad mates were similarly solemn, the encounter having fundamentally altered their understanding of what it meant to be warriors in service to their country. General Westwood, who had been watching this exchange with approval, addressed the group once more. Gentlemen, what you've witnessed today wasn't just a demonstration of skill, it was a demonstration of character. In our profession, the two cannot be separated. He looked at Harrison with undisguised admiration. This man saved my life not just because he could make an impossible shot, but because he was willing to risk everything to do what was right. Remember that lesson long after you've forgotten the trajectory calculations? General Morgan nodded in agreement. I think we've given these young men plenty to think about for one day. Sergeant Reeves, I'll see you and your squad in my office tomorrow morning as planned. The rest of you are dismissed. As the Marines began to disperse, many of them casting lingering glances at Harrison and the orange rifle, Reeves remained behind. He seemed to be struggling with a question. Something on your mind, Sergeant? Harrison asked. Sir, I was wondering. Reeves hesitated, then pressed on. How did you know about the shot in Honduras, I mean? How did you know you could make it when nobody else would even try? Harrison considered the question carefully. It went to the heart of who he was, not just as a sniper, but as a man. I didn't know, he admitted finally. Not with certainty. What I knew was that if I didn't take the shot, Westwood would die. If I missed, we'd both die. So there was really only one choice to make. He looked at the orange rifle, his expression distant. Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Reeves nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Thank you, sir, he said quietly before turning to join his departing squad. Left alone with Harrison, Generals Morgan and Westwood exchanged a look that contained decades of shared history. You know what this means, don't you, Bill? Westwood asked. Your quiet retirement just got a lot less quiet. Harrison sighed. I was afraid of that. Morgan smiled. The story of the ghost of the desert and his orange rifle is going to spread through every branch of the service by nightfall. You might as well embrace it. I never wanted to be a legend, Harrison protested mildly. Just wanted to do my job and then be left in peace. Westwood laughed, clapping his old friend on the shoulder. Too late for that. You saved the wrong pilot. Should have let me die in that jungle. Would have saved you a lot of trouble. Despite himself, Harrison smiled. The thought did cross my mind once or twice. The three veterans shared a moment of comfortable silence, the kind that can only exist between people who have seen both the worst and the best of what humanity has to offer. What now? Harrison finally asked. Morgan glanced at Westwood, then back to Harrison. Now I think we have an opportunity. These young Marines and others like them need what you know, not just the technical skills, but the wisdom that comes with them. I'm not a teacher, Harrison objected. You taught me to survive, Westwood countered. You taught Morgan here to shoot when she was a green lieutenant. Teaching is in your blood, whether you acknowledge it or not. Harrison looked out across the desert range, considering the proposition. The life he had carefully constructed for himself, quiet, anonymous, private, would change if he accepted. Yet there was an undeniable appeal in passing on what he knew to a new generation. I'll think about it, he finally said, which both generals recognized as the closest thing to agreement they were likely to get. Morgan nodded, satisfied. That's all we ask. She checked her watch. We should get back to the base. There's paperwork to file if we're going to rename this facility. As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, Harrison carrying the orange rifle with the same care he had shown for nearly 4 decades, Westwood fell into step beside him. You know what I remember most about those 3 days in the jungle? The general asked. Harrison glanced at him questioningly. Not the fear or the pain, Westwood continued. It was watching you work on that rifle. How calm you were, how focused even with enemy patrols all around us. I remember thinking, if this man believes we can survive this, then we will. That certainty saved me as surely as your marksmanship did. Harrison nodded, understanding. In the crucible of extreme circumstances, faith in another person could be as powerful as any weapon. As they reached the vehicles, Harrison looked back at the firing range one last time. Sergeant Reeves was still visible in the distance, gathering his equipment. The young Marine's posture was different now. More thoughtful, less arrogant. Maybe there is something to this teaching idea after all, Harrison murmured to himself. The orange rifle caught the sunlight as he carefully placed it in its case. A tool built for one desperate mission had become a bridge across generations, a tangible link between the warriors of yesterday and those of tomorrow. And as the convoy pulled away from the range, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, the legend of the ghost of the desert and his impossible shot was already beginning to spread, a story that would be told and retold in barracks and briefing rooms for years to come. The fallout from the events at Fort Irwin's long-range facility was swift and decisive. By sunset, the story of William Harrison and his orange rifle had traveled through secure communication channels to every major military installation in the country. Senior officers who recognized the classified designation attached to Harrison's name reacted with disbelief that the legendary ghost of the desert was not only alive, but had demonstrated his extraordinary skill in front of a group of young Marines. For Sergeant James Reeves, the consequences were more immediate and personal. The following morning at precisely 0600 hours, he stood at rigid attention outside Brigadier General Morgan's office, his squad lined up beside him. Their uniforms were immaculate, their posture perfect, their expressions grave with the understanding that they had crossed a line few would ever approach. General Morgan kept them waiting for exactly 7 minutes, a small but calculated reminder of who held the power in this situation. When she finally emerged from her office, the early morning sunlight gleaming on her single star, her face revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Inside," she said simply, holding the door open. The Marines filed in silently, coming to attention before her desk. The office was austere but impressive, with a wall of combat photographs and commendations that told the story of Morgan's distinguished career. But it was what sat on her desk that immediately drew every eye. The orange rifle rested on a custom stand, its distinctive profile unmistakable, even in the subdued lighting of the office. "At ease," Morgan said, moving behind her desk. "You may be wondering why Captain Harrison's rifle is here." The Marines exchanged quick glances but remained silent. "He left it for your education," she continued. "A gesture I find remarkably generous given yesterday's events." Reeves swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against the tight collar of his uniform. "For the next 30 days, you will report to the base museum at 0500 hours, where you will assist in cataloging and maintaining our collection of historic weapons and equipment." Morgan informed them, her voice level but brooking no argument. "In the afternoons, you will attend special seminars on the history of American special operations, with particular emphasis on the contributions of veterans who served in classified roles." She picked up a stack of books from beside her desk, walking down the line of Marines and handing one to each. "These are the biographies of Medal of Honor recipients. Each of you will select one and write a 20-page analysis of not just what they did, but why their actions matter to you as a Marine. You will explore how their examples should shape your conduct and understanding of your duty." When she reached Reeves, she paused, looking him directly in the eye. "Sergeant, as the senior NCO present during yesterday's incident, you will have additional responsibilities." "Yes, ma'am," Reeves replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "You will assist Master Sergeant Davis in developing the preliminary curriculum for what will be called the Harrison Marksmanship Program. This will require you to research Captain Harrison's techniques and innovations as documented in declassified materials." Reeves blinked in surprise. This wasn't punishment. It was an opportunity, one that any serious sniper would covet. Reading his expression, Morgan allowed a small, tight smile. "Captain Harrison specifically requested your involvement, Sergeant. He seems to believe you have potential, despite your momentary lapse in judgment." The revelation hit Reeves with the force of a physical blow. The man he had disrespected, the legend he had mocked to his face, was now advocating for his professional advancement. "I don't understand, ma'am," he admitted. Morgan's expression softened fractionally. "Harrison has always been an excellent judge of character, Sergeant. He believes that your arrogance stems not from inherent disrespect, but from a lack of proper context and mentorship." She glanced at the orange rifle. "He sees something in you worth cultivating." The weight of this unexpected reprieve settled on Reeves's shoulders. I won't disappoint him, ma'am. See that you don't. Morgan returned to her desk and sat down. One final note. By direct order of General Westwood, a base-wide mandate has been issued requiring all personnel to attend a new annual training seminar on veteran interaction and respect. You and your squad will assist in developing this program as well. She looked at each Marine in turn, her gaze penetrating. This incident will have lasting consequences, gentlemen. Not as punishment, but as education. Now dismissed. Report to the museum curator at 0800. The Marines filed out silently, their minds processing the unexpected direction their careers had just taken. As the door closed behind them, Morgan turned to the window, watching the sun rise fully over the desert landscape. She reached out and gently touched the orange rifle, a tangible connection to a past that few would ever fully understand. You always did know how to make a point, Bill, she murmured to the empty room. 3 weeks passed, each day bringing new revelations to Sergeant Reeves and his squad. Their mornings at the museum introduced them to artifacts and equipment from conflicts spanning more than 2 centuries of American military history. Each piece told a story of innovation, necessity, and courage. In the afternoons, they attended seminars led by historians with security clearances high enough to access the redacted corners of America's military past. They learned about operations that had never made the history books, met veterans whose contributions remained officially unacknowledged, and began to understand the vast hidden network of sacrifice that underpinned the freedom they had taken for granted. For Reeves, the experience was transformative. The arrogance that had defined him was giving way to something deeper and more substantial, a profound respect for the continuum of service, of which he was just one small part. He threw himself into researching Harrison's contributions, spending his evenings in the base library, poring over declassified technical manuals and ballistic studies. It was in that library on a quiet evening, when most of the base was winding down for the night, that Reeves looked up from his reading to see William Harrison himself walking through the door. The old veteran moved with the same quiet purpose that Reeves now recognized as the product of decades of disciplined movement. Harrison headed for a section on advanced engineering, seemingly unaware of Reeves's presence. Reeves's heart hammered in his chest. He stood his chair, scraping against the floor, drawing Harrison's attention. The sergeant approached, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with newfound respect. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice barely above a whisper in the quiet library. "Sir, I wanted to apologize properly. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant and deeply wrong." Harrison studied the young Marine, seeing beyond the moment to the man Reeves was becoming. The transformation was already visible in the way he carried himself, in the humility that now tempered his natural confidence. "I told you, son," Harrison said kindly. "Humility? It looks good on you. You wear it well." Reeves swallowed, then took a chance. "I've been researching your work, sir. The ballistic calculations you developed for extreme long-range shooting. They're beautiful, like mathematical poetry." A flicker of surprise crossed Harrison's weathered face, followed by a hint of pleasure. "Most people just see the end result. They don't appreciate the elegance of the process." "I'd like to understand it better," Reeves admitted, "especially your approach to atmospheric variables and spin drift compensation." Harrison regarded him thoughtfully. "Those textbooks only tell part of the story. The principles are there, but the application—" He trailed off, considering something. "Tell you what, meet me at the range tomorrow at 0500, before your museum duty. Bring your rifle." Hope flared in Reeves's chest. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Harrison nodded and turned back to the shelves, selecting a book on metallurgical advances. The conversation was clearly over, but Reeves stood rooted to the spot, processing what had just happened. He had been granted a private lesson with the ghost of the desert himself. The following morning, darkness still blanketed the desert as Reeves arrived at the newly christened Harrison Long Distance Facility. The temperature hovered just above 40 degrees the desert night, having leached away the previous day's heat. Stars blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, their ancient light a reminder of the immensity against which human achievements were measured. Harrison was already there, a solitary figure at the farthest shooting bench. No orange rifle today. Instead, a thermos of coffee and a worn leather case sat beside him. As Reeves approached, the old veteran gestured to the bench across from him. "Coffee," Harrison offered, pouring a steaming cup without waiting for an answer. Reeves accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping through his gloves. Thank you, sir. We'll wait for first light, Harrison said, nodding toward the eastern horizon, where the barest hint of gray had begun to push back the night. In the meantime, tell me what you've learned these past weeks. Reeves collected his thoughts, determined to make the most of this opportunity. I've been studying your papers on terminal ballistics and environmental compensation, and I've been working with the museum curator, learning about the evolution of sniper techniques from the Civil War through modern conflicts. Harrison nodded, seemingly satisfied. And what have you taken from all that study? The question went deeper than technical knowledge, and Reeves knew it. That what we do isn't new. That every technique and technology we use today has roots in what came before. That we stand on the shoulders of those who figured it out the hard way. A small smile touched Harrison's lips. Not bad, Sergeant. Not bad at all. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky gradually lightened, the stars fading as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the distant mountains. The desert came alive with color and shadow, revealing its subtle contours and vast distances. Now, Tom, Harrison said, setting down his coffee, let's see your rifle. Reeves carefully opened his case, revealing his M40A7 sniper rifle, the current standard for Marine Corps snipers. It was an impressive weapon with a custom stock match-grade barrel and advanced optics. Harrison examined it with expert hands, his fingers tracing the contours of the stock, checking the action, and evaluating the mounting of the scope. Good foundation, he commented. But a rifle is like a custom suit. It needs to be tailored to the shooter. For the next hour, Harrison guided Reeves through a series of minute adjustments to his shooting position, his grip, even his breathing pattern. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible individually, but their cumulative effect was transformative. The equipment matters, Harrison explained, but not as much as most people think. The human is the real weapon system. The rifle is just an extension of your will. He opened the leather case he had brought, revealing a set of handcrafted tools unlike anything Reeves had seen before. These are for fine-tuning. I made them over the years as I needed them. With these specialized tools, Harrison showed Reeves how to make micro-adjustments to his trigger pull, how to bed the action perfectly in the stock, how to eliminate minute imperfections that could affect accuracy at extreme distances. This is knowledge that isn't in any manual, Reeves realized aloud. Harrison nodded. Can't be. Some things can only be passed directly hand-to-hand, mind-to-mind. As the morning progressed, their conversation ranged from technical aspects of marksmanship to the ethical considerations of the sniper's role. Harrison spoke of the weight of responsibility that came with the ability to take life from a distance, the discipline required to know when not to pull the trigger, and the burden of carrying those decisions afterward. The shot you don't take can be as important as the one you do, he said. That's something they can't teach you in sniper school. It has to come from within. By the time the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the range, Reeves had gained insights that would have taken years to develop on his own. More than techniques or mechanical adjustments, Harrison had given him a philosophy and approach to his craft that transcended the purely physical aspects. Thank you, sir, Reeves said as they packed up their equipment. I can't express how much this means. Harrison studied him for a moment. You remind me of myself at your age. Talented, driven, a hint of a smile. Maybe a bit too sure of yourself. Reeves acknowledged this with a rueful nod. The difference is I had to learn some of these lessons the hard way. Harrison closed his case with a definitive click. If you're smart, you'll learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them. As they walked back toward the base, Harrison asked an unexpected question. What do you know about the others? Others, sir, the men in your squad. What kind of Marines are they? Reeves considered this. They're good Marines, sir. Sanders has the best eyes in the unit. Miller is our tech specialist, brilliant with the ballistic computers. Johnson has steady hands, never rushes a shot. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Bring them tomorrow, same time. Surprise registered on Reeves's face. All of them, sir. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted, Sergeant. These lessons aren't just for you. The impact of this statement wasn't lost on Reeves. Harrison was entrusting him with expanding the circle, with being the conduit through which this specialized knowledge would flow to others. I'll bring them, sir. Thank you. Harrison gave a small nod and turned away, walking toward the parking area where his old pickup truck waited. Reeves watched him go, struck by the parallels between the old veteran and the weapon he had created. Both were unassuming at first glance, their true capabilities hidden beneath a modest exterior. Both were products of experience refined by the harshest conditions imaginable. And both had changed the course of Reeves's life in ways he was only beginning to understand. The following week brought a special event to Fort Irwin. The firing range was closed to regular training, reserved for a demonstration that had drawn high-ranking officers from across all branches of service. News of Harrison's 4,000-meter shot had spread far beyond the base, generating interest that not even the classified nature of his career could contain. General Morgan stood with Colonel Bennett and a handful of other senior officers. Sergeant Reeves and his squad were there too, standing at a respectful distance, transformed from disruptors to privileged witnesses. The Marines bore little resemblance to the arrogant young men who had mocked Harrison's orange rifle. Their posture reflected their new understanding, their faces serious with the weight of the history they now appreciated. William Harrison was at the bench, the orange rifle before him. He had been asked by the general to once again demonstrate what the weapon could do. The 4,000-meter target shimmered in the distance, a challenge that most present still considered beyond the realm of practical marksmanship. There was no fanfare as Harrison prepared. He checked the wind using the same simple thread method he had shown Reeves, his movements economical and precise. He consulted a small notebook, making calculations based on the current conditions. Every eye was fixed on him, watching a master at work. General Westwood knelt beside Harrison, resuming his role as spotter, the partnership that had begun in the jungles of Honduras, continuing on this sun-baked range decades later. The two veterans communicated in the shorthand of old comrades, a raised eyebrow or slight nod conveying what others would need paragraphs to express. When Harrison was ready, he settled into position, becoming almost preternaturally still. The only movement was his chest rising and falling in the controlled rhythm of a disciplined breathing pattern. Then even that stilled as he prepared to take the shot. The crack of the rifle was sharp in the desert air, the sound traveling outward like a ripple in a pond. The orange stock barely moved against Harrison's shoulder, the recoil control system he had designed performing flawlessly after all these years. Seconds passed, the bullet traveling its immense arc across the desert. Then the small screen beside General Morgan flashed green. Another perfect hit dead center. A collective gasp went up from the assembled officers, followed by spontaneous applause. Even those who had witnessed the shot days before were no less impressed by its repetition. Hitting a target at that distance once might be attributed to luck. Doing it twice removed all doubt about the shooter's skill and the weapon's capability. General Westwood clapped Harrison on the shoulder, pride evident in his face. "Just like old times, Bill." Harrison allowed himself a small smile as he safed the weapon and rose from the bench. The moment of satisfaction was brief, his natural modesty reasserting itself as he stepped back to let others examine the rifle and the target data. General Morgan approached, tablet in hand. "The shot registered at precisely 412 meters, Bill. That's not just beating the current world record, it's obliterating it." Harrison shrugged. "Records are just numbers. The shot itself is what matters." Morgan smiled at this typical response. "Well, the numbers have made quite an impression upstairs. I've received authorization to establish the Harrison Marksmanship program as an official part of our advanced training curriculum." She handed him the tablet, which displayed an order signed by the Joint Chiefs themselves. It was a formal recognition of Harrison's contributions, authorizing the creation of a specialized training program that would incorporate his methods and philosophy. "They want you as this program's technical advisor," Morgan continued. "Civilian consultant status, classified clearance renewed." Harrison frowned slightly. "I'm retired, Eleanor. Have been for a long time." "And you can remain retired," she assured him. "This isn't about bringing you back into service. It's about ensuring your knowledge isn't lost." From behind them, General Westwood added, "Think of it as your legacy, Bill. A way to make sure what you learned the hard way benefits the next generation." Harrison looked at the orange rifle, then at Reeves and his squad standing nearby. The transformation in those young Marines was evident, a testament to what could be achieved when experience was properly valued and transmitted. "I'll consider it," he said finally. Morgan and Westwood exchanged glance, recognizing this as the closest thing to agreement they were likely to get from Harrison at this stage. "That's all we ask," Morgan said, taking back the tablet. "In the meantime, there's something else I want to discuss with you." She led Harrison a short distance away, out of earshot of the others. The orange rifle, Bill. It belongs in a place of honor. Harrison's expression grew guarded. The rifle was more than a tool to him. It was a tangible connection to some of the most significant moments of his life, a piece of his personal history. We'd like to create a special display at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, Morgan explained gently. A permanent exhibition on the evolution of precision marksmanship with your rifle as the centerpiece. My rifle stays with me, Eleanor. Harrison said, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. Morgan nodded, having anticipated this response. I understand, but would you consider allowing us to create a replica for the museum? Our technical team could work under your supervision to ensure it's an exact copy. The story would be told in full with your approval on every detail. Harrison considered this compromise. The story isn't just about me. It's about Westwood, about the extraction team, about everyone who was part of that mission. Absolutely, Morgan agreed. We'll tell the complete story, honoring everyone involved to the extent security classifications allow. After a long moment, Harrison nodded. I'll help your team build a replica, but on one condition. Name it. I want Sergeant Reeves to be part of the team. Harrison looked toward the young Marine. He needs to understand not just how to use these weapons, but how to create them if necessary. The principles behind the technology. Morgan smiled, recognizing the beginning of a mentor-student relationship that could benefit the Corps for years to come. Done. As they rejoined the main group, Westwood was regaling the assembled officers with the full story of the Honduras mission, filling in details that Harrison had been too modest to share. The officers listened with rapt attention, professional curiosity, mixing with genuine awe as Westwood described the circumstances under which the orange rifle had been created. 3 days, Westwood emphasized, his voice carrying across the range. 3 days with enemy patrols searching for us, with my leg badly infected with limited supplies and no communication. And in those 3 days, Bill not only kept us both alive, but managed to build this rifle from salvaged parts. He gestured toward the orange weapon. When I first saw him working on it, delirious with fever as I was, I thought he'd lost his mind. Here we were deep in hostile territory, and he was building a rifle instead of planning our escape. It wasn't until later that I understood the rifle was our escape plan. Westwood described the arrival of the Soviet KGB operative, the decision Harrison made to attempt the impossible shot, and the precision with which he executed it despite the challenging conditions. The shot itself was remarkable enough, Westwood said, but what has stayed with me all these years was what Bill said afterward as we waited for extraction. I asked him how he knew he could make that shot a shot no one had ever made before under those conditions, and he said, I didn't know. I just knew what would happen if I didn't try. The general looked at Harrison with undisguised admiration. That's the difference between a true warrior and everyone else. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Not the certainty of success, but the acceptance of the cost of failure. As the day's event concluded and the officers began to disperse, Reeves approached Harrison, standing at a respectful distance until the older man acknowledged him. Sir, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be part of the replica project, Reeves said. It's an honor I never expected. Harrison studied him. It's not a reward, Sergeant. It's a responsibility. That rifle represents something important, something that goes beyond its function as a weapon. I'm trusting you to understand that and to help others understand it too. Reeves nodded solemnly. I won't let you down, sir. See that you don't, Harrison replied, but there was no harshness in his tone, only the expectation of excellence that he applied first and foremost to himself. As Harrison packed up the orange rifle, handling it with the same care he had shown for nearly 4 decades, Reeves noticed something he hadn't before: a small inscription on the stock barely visible beneath the orange paint. When Harrison saw his attention on it, he turned the rifle slightly, allowing Reeves to read the faded words, "For those who wait in darkness." Reeves looked questioningly at Harrison. A reminder, Harrison explained quietly, of why we do what we do, not for glory or recognition, not for ourselves, but for those who depend on us when they have nowhere else to turn. The simple statement encapsulated the philosophy that had guided Harrison throughout his career, the unwavering commitment to duty that had made him a legend. It was a perspective that transcended the technical aspects of marksmanship, touching on the deeper purpose that gave meaning to their service. In the months that followed, the Harrison Marksmanship program took shape, combining cutting-edge technology with the timeless wisdom Harrison had accumulated throughout his career. Sergeant Reeves, now selected for promotion to staff sergeant, worked closely with Harrison on developing the curriculum, absorbing not just techniques but an entire approach to the sniper's craft. The replica of the orange rifle was created under Harrison's exacting supervision, with Reeves learning firsthand the principles of weapon design that had made the original so exceptional. Every detail was faithfully reproduced down to the precise composition of the orange paint that had saved Harrison and Westwood in the jungles of Honduras. Word of the program spread throughout the Special Operations community, generating interest that extended beyond the Marine Corps to all branches of service. What had begun as a chance encounter between an old veteran and a group of young Marines had evolved into something that would influence military doctrine for generations to come. 1 year to the day after Harrison's demonstration at the range, a formal ceremony was held to dedicate the Harrison Marksmanship Training Center, a state-of-the-art facility built adjacent to the long-distance range. The center housed classroom simulation systems and a comprehensive library of materials related to precision shooting throughout military history. The ceremony drew high-ranking officials from across the defense establishment, as well as selected media representatives who had been carefully briefed on what aspects of Harrison's career could be made public. The result was a controlled narrative that honored his contributions while preserving the classified nature of much of his work. Harrison, now 83, attended, reluctantly uncomfortable with the attention, but unwilling to disappoint General Morgan or the young Marines who had worked so hard to establish the program. He wore a simple suit rather than any of the uniforms or decorations he was entitled to, his only concession to the occasion being the West Point class ring that rarely left his finger. General Morgan opened the ceremony with remarks that placed Harrison's contributions in historical context, emphasizing how his innovations had saved countless American lives by enabling precision engagements that avoided larger, more costly conflicts. General Westwood followed, speaking movingly about his personal debt to Harrison and the bond forged in those 3 desperate days in Honduras. "Some men are defined by a single moment of courage," he said. "Bill Harrison has had a lifetime of such moments, most of which will never be known to the public. But those of us who have been privileged to serve alongside him understand the true measure of the man." When it came time for Harrison himself to speak, he approached the podium with evident reluctance. The crowd fell silent, eager to hear from the legend who had so rarely spoken publicly about his experiences. "I'm not one for speeches," he began, his voice strong despite his years. "Never have been. I prefer to let my work speak for itself." He paused, looking out over the assembled faces. "But there are some things that need to be said, especially to the young men and women who will train here." He gestured toward the building behind him. "This center isn't about me. It's about a tradition of excellence that stretches back to the earliest days of our nation. It's about the responsibility that comes with the ability to deliver precision effects at a distance." Harrison looked directly at the section where Reeves and his squad sat. "The most important things I can teach you aren't about ballistics or marksmanship. They're about judgment, discipline, the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait, the courage to do what's necessary even when it seems impossible." His gaze swept across the audience. "The rifle is just a tool. You are the weapon, and like any weapon, your effectiveness depends on how you're employed. Choose your battles carefully, respect your capabilities, and never forget who you're fighting for." As Harrison concluded his brief remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation. He acknowledged it with a simple nod before returning to his seat, characteristically understated even in a moment of public recognition. The ceremony concluded with the formal unveiling of the replica orange rifle in a custom display case at the center's entrance. Beside it, a simple plaque told the story of its creation and the mission it had enabled, a permanent reminder of what could be accomplished through skill, determination, and courage. As the crowd dispersed following the ceremony, Sergeant Reeves found Harrison standing alone near the display, examining the replica with a critical eye. "Did we get it right, sir?" Reeves asked, knowing how important the accuracy of the reproduction had been to Harrison. Harrison nodded. "Close enough." He glanced at Reeves. "Though the original still shoots better." Reeves smiled, recognizing the subtle humor that he had come to appreciate in his mentor. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from formal instruction to something deeper, a genuine connection based on shared values and mutual respect. The first class starts next week, Reeves said. 20 students from all four branches, the best of the best. And you'll be leading them? Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. He had personally recommended Reeves for the position. Yes, sir, following your curriculum. Harrison looked at him appraisingly. The curriculum is just a framework. You'll need to adapt it to each student. No two shooters are alike. I understand, sir. Reeves hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. Will you be there for the first class, I mean? Harrison was silent for a moment, considering. His initial involvement with the program had been reluctant, a concession to Generals Morgan and Westwood, rather than a personal desire for recognition. But over the months of development, he had found unexpected satisfaction in passing on his knowledge, in seeing understanding dawn in the eyes of young Marines like Reeves. I'll be there, he finally said, for the first day at least, to make sure you get them started right. Reeves nodded, knowing this was as much commitment as Harrison was comfortable making. Thank you, sir. It will mean a lot to the students. As they walked together toward the exit, Harrison asked, Do you remember what I told you that first morning on the range about humility? Yes, sir, that it's the heaviest burden a warrior carries, but also the most valuable. Harrison nodded. There's something else you need to understand now that you're becoming a teacher yourself. He stopped, turning to face Reeves directly. The greatest test of humility isn't accepting correction. It's giving knowledge away, holding nothing back, ensuring that your students surpass you. Reeves considered this understanding the profound generosity inherent in Harrison's approach to mentorship. Is that what your teachers did for you? A shadow crossed Harrison's face. Some did. Others held back, thinking their knowledge was their power. He shook his head slightly. That's the wrong approach. Knowledge only has power when it's shared, when it grows beyond any single individual. They resumed walking, emerging into the bright desert sunlight. In the parking lot, Harrison's old pickup truck sat among the gleaming official vehicles, as unassuming as its owner. One last thing, Sergeant, Harrison said as they reached the truck. Remember that these students aren't just learning techniques. They're inheriting a tradition. Make sure they understand the weight of that inheritance. Reeves straightened unconsciously. I will, sir. Harrison opened the truck door, but paused before getting in. He reached into the cab and retrieved a small wooden box, which he handed to Reeves. What's this, sir? Reeves asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. Open it when you get home, Harrison instructed. It's something for your first class. With that, he climbed into the truck and started the engine. Reeves stepped back, rendering a crisp salute that Harrison acknowledged with a nod, before driving away the dust trail following his vehicle across the desert landscape. That evening, in the privacy of his quarters, Reeves opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was the firing pin from the orange rifle, polished to a mirror finish and mounted on a small plaque. A note in Harrison's precise handwriting accompanied it. The heart of any rifle is its firing pin. The heart of any warrior is his purpose. Keep both true. W.H. Reeves ran his finger over the firing pin, understanding the significance of the gift. Harrison had given him a piece of the legendary rifle, a tangible connection to the history he was now responsible for transmitting to the next generation. The following week, as Reeves stood before the inaugural class of the Harrison Marksmanship program, the firing pin was displayed prominently on his desk. And as promised, William Harrison attended the first day, his quiet presence adding weight to Reeves's opening words. Gentlemen, welcome to the Harrison Marksmanship program. Reeves began surveying the 20 elite shooters selected from across the armed forces. Before we begin, I want to tell you a story about an orange rifle and the man who built it. It's a story about more than marksmanship. It's about the kind of warriors we aspire to be. As Reeves recounted the events that had led to the program's creation, he saw in the students' eyes the same transformation that had occurred in him, the shift from viewing sniping as merely a technical skill to understanding it as a discipline that encompassed mind, body, and spirit. Harrison listened from the back of the room, his expression inscrutable. But as the day progressed and he observed Reeves teaching with confidence and humility, a subtle change came over the old veteran's face. It was the look of a man who recognized that his legacy was secure, that the knowledge he had gained through hardship and sacrifice would continue to serve long after he was gone. When Harrison departed that afternoon, declining the formal farewell the students wanted to give him, Reeves understood it was not an ending, but a transition. The ghost of the desert was fading back into the shadows, where he had always been most comfortable, leaving behind not just techniques and principles, but a philosophy that would shape the future of American special operations. The orange rifle now secured in Harrison's home would remain a personal symbol of one mission, one moment when the impossible had been achieved through skill and courage. But its legacy would live on in the snipers trained under the program that bore Harrison's name, each of them carrying forward the lessons of a man who had never sought recognition, only excellence. And in the years to come, when new generations of warriors faced their own seemingly impossible challenges, they would draw strength from the story of William Harrison and his orange rifle, a reminder that limitations exist primarily in the mind, and that with sufficient will and skill, even the most daunting obstacles can be overcome. The legend of the ghost of the desert had come full circle, from a desperate innovation in a jungle workshop to an institutionalized tradition that would influence American military capability for decades to come. It was a legacy not of the rifle itself, but of the man who had built it, a testament to the enduring impact of one individual's courage, creativity, and commitment to duty. As the sun set over Fort Irwin that evening, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Staff Sergeant James Reeves stood at the firing line looking out at the 4,000-meter target that Harrison had hit with such remarkable precision. The distance seemed both impossible and achievable, now a paradox that encapsulated the lesson at the heart of Harrison's teaching: the limits of possibility are defined not by what others believe can be done, but by what you are willing to attempt. With this understanding firmly fixed in his mind, Reeves turned to his waiting students, ready to pass on the knowledge that had been entrusted to him, continuing the unbroken line of warriors who had learned, adapted, and taught others to do the same. The legacy of the Orange Rifle would live on, not as a museum piece, but as a living tradition of excellence, courage, and unwavering commitment to duty.